Good afternoon. Welcome to the second in a series of webcasts sponsored by the Center for International Trade and Transportation, a division of the College of Continuing and Professional Education here at California State University, Long Beach. I'm Matt Kaplan. It's once again my very great pleasure to moderate this series that we've titled Cargo and Jobs, Still Ours to Lose? Those of you who joined us for the first program exactly 2 weeks ago will remember that our theme is inspired by the challenges that may be coming our way when the expanded Panama Canal opens in 2014. We focused on this question at our Point Counterpoint event held here on campus last October. And this limited series of webcasts was created because we realized that we really had just barely scratched the surface as we examined how our Southern California ports may be affected and how we should respond. So 2 weeks ago, that was May 20th, MIQ Logistics President and CEO Joey Carnes helped us understand the competitive factors that steer shippers to different ports. This session was recorded, I should say that session was recorded. It's now available on demand from the CITT website. There's a link to our website right here on the CITT net channel here in the live stream world. All you have to do is scroll down below me, right down there, and you'll be able to see it. Now, once you're there, look for the webinars link. That'll be under News and Events. That's in the left-hand menus that you can see in that window at the CITT website. The other way, of course, you can do this is simply to Google the Center for International Trade and Transportation, and that'll zip you right to us. It should be the top entry in your Google results. We'll wrap up this series 2 weeks from today. That'll be June 17th when we talk with the Port of Long Beach Executive Director Richard Steinke and John McLaren of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. Today we're going to get yet another vital viewpoint from our special guest, Fran Inman of Majestic Realty, who will talk about what's being done right here in Southern California to meet these challenges. I'm going to introduce Fran in just a moment, but first we want to again thank our sponsors for making this series possible. They are the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, and the Metrans Transportation Center. Metrans is a federally funded university transportation center headed by Dr. Jen Giuliano. It's a partnership between the University of Southern California and California State University, Long Beach. All of these sponsors are very important partners of both the CITT and CSULB, and we do thank them very much. It's time to turn to our guest, Fran Inman. Fran is Senior Vice President at Majestic Realty, one of the nation's largest privately held, family-owned real estate development companies. She directs all public relations, and government affairs activity there. Majestic's portfolio includes more than 70 million square feet of commercial property. Fran is also the founding president of the Majestic Realty Foundation. It has provided millions of dollars for community services. Not quite a year ago, she was appointed to the California Transportation Commission. And among her many other contributions to the state and region was her service as chair of the board at the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. She's also a member of the Metrans Advisory Board. And we're going to forgive her for earning both her bachelor's degree and MBA at Cal State Fullerton. Fran, thanks very much for joining us.
Go Titans.
Big game today, right?
Big game today, yes. I think it's on ESPNU this afternoon.
All right,
so
well,
time for those baseball playoffs.
At least they're a sister campus in the CSU,
We love that.
So go Titans. Now, we're also going to be joined by my colleague, Tom O'Brien, later in the hour. Tom will once again be managing the questions we receive from you via the chat window that should be open in your live stream player right here on the CITT Net channel. As I talk with Fran, we hope that you will be thinking about the questions and comments that you'd like to share with us. Tom is already monitoring the chat window, and he will be joining us in something like a half hour, roughly. So, Fran, let me start with talking about your position and Majestic Realty. Why has your company taken such an active role in the Southern California goods movement sector? It's kind of an obvious question, I suppose.
Well, I'm not so sure it really is an obvious question. I mean, it is to us, but we woke up probably about a decade ago, and our company is 63, 64 years old. good old real estate guys, and we really, we own 70 million square feet. Our core competency and the majority of our portfolio is warehouse distribution industrial. And so probably about a decade ago, maybe eight to 10 years ago, we heard from our tenants that they couldn't make their turns to the port. And so our chairman called me in and said, you need to find out about this. We're hearing that they can't make their turns to the port. And I can assure you there wasn't anybody on our team that knew anybody from the port necessarily. We knew our tenants well. We've always done a good job of building long-term relationships. So we had good, solid relationships with major tenants. And we have actually migrated across the United States with a number of our tenants. So it's one of those things that the more you get into, I like to say it was kind of like peeling back an onion, and the more, we cried a little bit, but we were also amazed at all of the different moving parts and how dynamic all of this was. And we have always tried to really listen to our tenants, see what's going on in their world. So this really made a lot of sense of listening to our customers, and but there haven't been a lot of real estate developers that do that. We do have a couple of other colleagues. Watson Land here in Southern California has been a really good partner. And I think the thing that's different about our two organizations is that we're portfolio builders. When we build our properties, we build them for the long term. We rarely, if ever, sell anything. So we know we're going to be in a community long term. That's why we actually formalized our foundation. But the different model, most of our competitors are real estate investment trusts today, and that's a different model of development. So I think it was a long-term perspective that really caused us to really get engaged and really educate ourselves and learn about all the various parts and the players in the system, and to understand historically we had always been along the rail. Our founder, Ed Roski Sr., followed by our current chairman, Ed Roski Jr., we love the rail. A lot of our tenants used to get deliveries, all their deliveries by the rail. But guess what? The world has changed. And today, when we're marketing a new product or a new project, we talk a lot about how much container storage we have and, you know, the truck parking. So it was just a fascinating journey for us. The timing made a lot of sense. We happen to be strategically located near the nation's largest port complex when you combine our two ports. And so it was just fascinating to get in and learn all the various roles. And while we've had a lot of challenges in our area, I am also really impressed with how much we've been able to do collectively. We didn't start out with a blank piece of paper and design a global supply chain. We have within our various silos different folks that have different components. Our railroads were designed when, you know, we were moving to an industrialized nation. So it's been great. We like to say our team speaks logistics as a second language.
Coming out of the silo, as Majestic did, I think is a key point that we're going to come back to, because you and I have talked about the collaboration that you're seeing now, because obviously you weren't the only ones who were kind of happily siloed for a long time in your own vertical market. But I'm also wondering, you know, if you go to the average Californian and you ask them about what is the goods movement industry, if they have any idea what you're talking about, they're probably going to say, okay, that's where those big ships pull up. It's the ports, it's trains, it's trucks. I don't know if they're going to talk about or even think about warehouses, distribution centers. Do you think that's right?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I like to say, tell your mama, we need to tell your mama campaign. Because, you know, with an elongated supply chain, It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We all run to Target or Home Depot or whatever. We go on Saturday morning with our little route of errands that we're doing. And we just assume that stuff's going to be there.
Mm-hmm. It's magic.
Without really thinking about how in the world, how many hands had to touch this, and how many systems had to flow to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, we realized this with the last transportation bill, Safety Lou, and we began an awareness campaign. Our company, as well as SCAG, our regional planning organization, and both our ports belong to a coalition of America's gateways and trade corridors.
Say SCAG, Southern California
Association of Governments,
mm-hmm.
yeah. And we were part of an awareness campaign that took very simple items. We used Starbucks coffee and went around. The focus of that was really on our elected officials that were going to be writing the transportation policy. But I think it's even broader than that in terms of how we need to make these systems move efficiently and how many moving parts there really are. And so I think that we still have a lot of work to do. We've come a long way. There's lots of discussion now. Perhaps we'll have a freight policy, a national freight policy in the new transportation bill.
You're hoping?
We're hoping, yeah. We've come a long way, but we're not finished in terms of the overall awareness campaign. And I think we need to extend the partners that help tell that story. It's really, really important. And then if you look at how in the world we fund a lot of these infrastructure investments, and it's complicated to do. So I think we have a lot of work still to do. We've made progress, but we can't let up.
When you talk about this progress, you're including that getting out of the silo, the collaboration, is a big part of this, right?
Oh, huge.
And do you think that progress alone, getting all of the stakeholders together in the same room or at least on the same page, does that need to go even further as well?
Oh, yeah, and it's ongoing. I think the fact that our company today has relationships with both ports, has relationships with our Class I railroads, and we've always had relationships with the railroads, but it's when we wanted to get a will-serve letter for one of our tenants. But I'm talking about serving side by side on various committees with a number of these folks, the PMSA, the truckers. We had to learn Trucking 101A when we came together to try to figure out how in the world a clean truck plan would work, because frankly our company doesn't hire the truckers. We're the landlords. We're like the ports in the fact that we own the buildings, we own the facilities, but we're not doing the daily operations.
But I'm sure that's worked both ways. You got truckers now, I'm sure, who know a heck of a lot more about distribution centers, warehousing, shipping lines as well. There has to be benefit in that.
Oh, I think so. And, we all sat down, or a number of us sat down with the Goods Movement Action Plan, which is, 5 or 6 years ago now. It was grueling at the time, the hours. But the byproduct from all of that was we all got to collectively meet the various players, and whether it was players from our communities, the environmental community, our agencies, the ports. I mean, we were all there, and we were all trying to work together. Now, it wasn't easy. But I just think that the direct benefit from that, when we came together as a state to pass transportation bonds, we already had first-name relationships. We could already pick up the phone and not have to introduce ourselves, but start the work. And I think the work we did on the trade corridors, as an example, with the bond money, is a direct result of the fact that we'd already come together. We'd already spent a lot of time vetting various issues. Not that we all agree, but it is so much better to respectfully disagree when at least you listen and And, you know, I think it's kind of biblical. If you look at sitting around the table, breaking bread, coming together, I think that's the only way to success for all of us.
What continues to drive that process? Is there a general awareness that we are all in this together here in Southern California?
Well, the Great Recession has been definitely an influencer on that. I think you had various pockets of the supply chain coming together in response to what we deemed a crisis situation at the time. And I think that clearly with the recession, the downturn, all of us are having to retool, reinvent our businesses. We see the various members of the supply chain casting off those business units that haven't been profitable. I think the whole chassis pool discussion, and the jury's still out on that. I don't know what the answer is, but I know the more that we talk to each other and think about what might be the better solution we'll all come to collectively. But I think that it just needs to be ongoing, and, you know, unfortunately we all respond to crises, and we had to have the great downturn. Another example of that is just next week we're going to start our first spec building, which means we're going to build a building without having the tenant already in our back pocket, which can be deemed risky for a lot of businesses. But we've seen enough positive net absorption in the Inland Empire and the San Gabriel Valley to convince us that we're moving in the right direction. It's a slow climb out, but I mean, that's a great sign. The good news is we're starting our first spec building. The challenge is, you know, it's 300,000 square feet when, you know, in 2006, I would never have written a press release about a 300,000 square foot building because that wouldn't be newsworthy. Those were the days when if it wasn't 750,000 square feet, you know, we'll let Matt do that one. We don't care.
As we climb out of this hole, and let's hope that some of the news and reports we've gotten just in the last couple of days.
Today.
Let's hope that's just a blip. But as we climb out of this hole, and we all hope that it's going to be a steady gain, is there still going to be enough awareness of the other challenges that we face, specifically the expansion of the Panama Canal, which is largely why we're here doing this today and why we did the Point Counterpoint event last October? I know you see this as a challenge. I won't call it a crisis because I wouldn't say we're at that level yet. Or maybe you would. Opportunity, good. Is this something that you're hearing from your colleagues, that they see that this is more reason for us to work together and respond?
I think so. You know, there's several efforts. We had a huge I'll call it a town hall last fall.
The Point Counterpoint event.
Which was wonderful in that, to me, even though there was differing opinions, we could all tell collectively in the supply chain we were all wearing the same jerseys. And I think that is just so powerful. I would hope that we'll never regress and go hide in our little silos totally in the future. But we have to be respectful of the business models. You know, we have some privately held companies, we have some publicly traded organizations, we have government entities. You know, our ports operate under the Tidelands Trust. There's certain things they can do and certain things they can't. So I think it is important for all of us to keep moving forward, keep building those relationships stronger and stronger. I think the Panama Canal, I was just on a panel last week in Savannah, and the topic was the Panama Canal. Everyone across the U.S., every port, is trying to say, oh, there's a new opportunity. I believe that we have so much to offer. And if we don't, in Southern California, we've got a huge population base. We've got natural deep water ports. If you look at the climate, I mean, collectively, I don't think we pay enough attention to the advantage of our climate. Mother Nature has been relentless this past year and the past several years in letting us know that she's still out there and healthy,
Right.
has a lot of energy, shall we say. So I think that if we can take this as an opportunity, I think that for each of us to pay attention to our customers and to listen to our customers, that's the best thing we can do. And, some of the entities have multiple customers and constituents that they need to be respectful of and figure out how we can have the balance. But I think that it gives us a continued opportunity to be all that we can be.
But you're not worried about the ability of the Southern California stakeholders to hold their own, to respond to this?
Oh, I'm very worried. I'm very, very worried. I'm an optimist by nature. No, I'm very worried. I think we could trip over ourselves very, very easily. I think that we have to remember that freight is like water, and it's continually moving, hopefully. We have scar tissue that's out there from the lockout that has been described as similar to the scars of the Depression that was left on that generation, that they never got over the fact. My parents were like that in the way they lived their lives. So I think as long as we have folks making logistics decisions, that's hanging out there, and we have to be better. I think that looking at the opportunity to continue this dialogue, I don't know if any other region has the collaboration that we have had. I know that there are certain regions that are very trade sensitive and seem to put a higher collective value on their freight volumes. We've struggled a little bit in terms of a love-hate relationship, I think, historically with the goods movement industry. And I think we need to be respectful of that. We need to listen to ideas. I think there's some great ideas. If we get out there and really talk to the folks that are doing the jobs every day. The thing I like about Metrans and the work that they do with CITT is I really see them as a practical research entity, really helping us. I mean, there are times when we need that voice, that independent third party to weigh in, but really to get out in the trenches, to get out on the docks. I mean, let's think about what we can do collectively together to make a smoother supply chain, because we'll all benefit from improving efficiencies.
When Joey Carnes was here, Joey Carnes of MIQ Logistics was here 2 weeks ago, he talked about how important it is that all the stakeholders remain aware of how fluid the supply chain is. I mean, you agree?
Oh,
clearly.
100%. And we can't rest on our laurels. And if anybody hasn't seen the webcast that was done, I'd highly recommend it. I thought Joey did a great job. And I thought about not coming today. I would just second it and say, hey, Joey told you, just replay that one. It was great. And I think he talked about the complexity of the supply chain and all the variables. And I can tell you from our perspective, I probably have, 100, 200, maybe 300 major tenants that are in the logistics supply chain, lots of 3PLs, similar business as Joey's.
Right.
And if you sat down with them and asked them, what's the best distribution, they'd say, well, it depends. And it's going to depend, as Joey said, what's the origin? What's the destination? If you look at the growth, our company's expansion has really kind of followed the Sun Belt. As I mentioned earlier, we've followed.
You said you followed your tenants.
Our tenants. Georgia is our second largest market. We have offices in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is our newest entity. We have 300 acres there, the old Bethlehem steel site. And then we're also in Texas, we're in Colorado, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. Each of those markets is very, very different. Each of our tenants are very different. And if I ask the tenants today, you know, what was the top of their mind, it would be one list of items. And if I ask them in 6 months, which we do on a regular basis, we get out to our tenants and try to talk to them and say, you know, what's working, you know, what's really working well, what isn't. Especially from the public policy side, we spend a lot of time and resources from our corporate side really staying engaged in the infrastructure debates. I think the California Transportation Commission, you know, we're very proud to be probably the loudest voice there in terms of working directly with the supply chain and communicating the importance. And as we look at the implementation of SB 375 and AB 32 in our state, I think it's really, really important that we are at the table. We're talking about where's that balance. I was on a panel yesterday with Urban Land Institute talking about transit-related development, and I pushed back a little bit and said, we don't build any residential. I'm the wrong person on this panel. And they said, no, we love it because of the fact that you help us understand that we really do have to find the balance. We have to have the goods on the shelves at Target or Home Depot or Ralph's. And so we appreciate the fact that you're, you know, kind of holding up the mirror to us and saying, wait a minute, it's not magic here.
People do think of residential and maybe lump you in there, but it's so different.
It's so different.
Talking about a difference of a penny a square foot.
Oh,
you weren't
huge.
Exaggerating, were you?
No. We will lose a deal over a penny per square foot. So our clients are very price sensitive for the most part. I know Joey talked about depending on where they were in their business life cycle, and I think that's true. But I think across the board you can say that every logistics officer has a plan B in his pocket. And so if you look at the opening of the Panama Canal, that is going to offer additional opportunities to folks.
Let me go back to, you mentioned the variables that Tom O'Brien and Joey Carnes and I talked about, and Tom really brought the three to the table: price, speed, reliability. Can I count on my freight, my materials being there, my products being where I need them, when I need them? And then Joey threw in one more. I got to look over to you, Tom. What was the fourth one? Infrastructure, making sure you can actually support it. First of all, you agree that those are...
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have all come to embrace, and whether you call it certainty, reliability, I mean, it's kind of common sense, really. I mean, you think about it, if you're held responsible for getting those goods to market. If you don't do your job, it's not going to matter how great the product was if you can't get it to the guy that needs it or the gal that needs it. So I think that clearly the fuel energy cost is a whole other dynamic that's changing out there. People, given the Great Recession and the fact of energy prices, I think that those C-level logistics officers that are in almost every one of our tenant organizations, which is, you know, fairly recent, that those positions have been elevated to really the C office suite. I think historically, if you looked back, we see it from the real estate perspective in terms of, you know, it was a good old real estate team that, you know, decided location, 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 and made those decisions, and then you know, if Matt was in charge of logistics, they'd say, Matt, we're going there, figure it out. Now I would argue that Matt's voice is equal to, if not greater than, the real estate decision, because you have to look at the all-in cost and try to get consensus around as many variables as you possibly can.
We've barely mentioned, although it has come up, the outreach that Majestic and others have done to elected officials, maybe even more important, their staffs, to regulators. What should be the role, we'll start with Sacramento, what else should we be seeing in terms of Sacramento helping the industry to respond to this opportunity, as you call it?
Well, I think we have a lot of work to do. First of all, the education, awareness, understanding of the supply chain. I think, generally speaking, if you and I sat down and talked about TEUs or dredge, I mean, they'd all look at us like, oh my gosh, you know, you're kind of weird. So I think really helping folks understand and different levels of understanding in terms of how the system works is very, very important. So we have a huge education campaign opportunity. And in the environment of term limits, that's ongoing. I think one of the challenges we have, and I'm very proud of the fact that while I was chair of the chamber, we partnered with the county fed on the term limit reform initiative that will be on the next ballot whenever we have a next ballot. And what that does is it modifies term limits. It actually takes the max from 14 to 12, but it will allow a member to stay in one house. And I think that's important because these are complicated. The infrastructure projects are complicated. Transportation's complicated. You can't possibly get up to speed as quickly as our term limit environment causes you to. Yeah. And that's repeated in a whole bunch of areas. I mean, education reform, there's a lot of effort going on in education reform. But I think really term limits have hampered our ability to really look at the long term. And if you think about it, these projects take a while. So if I'm an elected official, I really want to do something that I can get done under my watch, you know, and I can be sure that I'm investing my energy. But if I'm going to start this and hope that the next guy or gal finishes it, who knows?
This is exactly what I had in mind when I said maybe more important, appealing to the staffs who tend to move on to, you know, the next person in line or find somebody else when their old boss has been termed out. Do you see that kind of continuity among the staff?
Yes, I think the staffs are so important, whether it's on the federal level, the state level, the regional level. Yes, you have a lot more staying power and likelihood of staying on topic, on a particular topic. But that said, it's the elected that's voting. Clearly they listen to their staffs, hopefully. But I think that we still have to continue that awareness. And it was brought home to me at the joint field hearing that Congressman Mica, or Chairman Mica, and Senator Boxer held on the upcoming, hopefully, the reauthorization or the new authorization, as we like to say, because we like to think it's going to be a new look at how we do our transportation projects. But I think, you know, what we heard there was one of the congressmen fairly new to the Transportation Committee talk about, you know, monies in his county that were self-help monies, and he thought they were going to go to the state. And, you know, we were like, oh my gosh, no, those funds are definitely restricted. The self-help counties, such as Los Angeles County, which with Measure R has its third transportation tax in place, where all of the residents have collectively decided that, you know, we're going to invest ourselves because we realize that gridlock is hurting all of us. So I think we have just a huge educational campaign we need to do. And then I think we need to have really every business in this recession, every agency that I know of is reinventing, retooling. And I think that we need to agree on our shared vision of the future, which is no easy task to do. And then see, are we using the best methods of getting there?
So outreach, education, awareness, the collaboration among the stakeholders that maybe you think of as maybe the most important factor.
Oh, yes.
What can you point to in terms of, you know, real world, the bricks and mortar type improvements? I know you've talked about a certain bridge that's going to be replaced
The
in Long
Gerald
Beach.
Desmond Bridge, yes, hooray. I think that was 20 years coming. But yeah, I mean, we have made some improvements, but it's really hard when you have so many needs to feel good. It's kind of like this recession. Okay, the economists told us the recession was over in 2009, but I still don't feel great about it. And I think if you listen to the job numbers today, you know, I think similar to that, we've come a long way, but we still have the opportunity and need to do a lot more.
Can you point to anything that, like the bridge, is sort of a real-world, a tangible response to the challenges that we face, or is that still in the future?
No, I think the Clean Air Action Plan is an example of that, and it was painful, and we all sat through lots of meetings, and there were lots of disagreement and lots of discussion. But at the end of the day, we have cleaned up the truck emissions considerably, I think 85%, and Tom can correct me with the stat on that, but a significant increase.
That's pretty tangible.
Did we take the most direct path in getting there? Probably not. I think you could get all of us that served on a number of different committees to say, no, there had to be an easier way. But we were pioneers in that regard. And as I travel around the United States and hear of other ports doing truck programs one way or another, you know, we were early out. It was tough. It was painful. I think we heard Joey say at his presentation that it's okay. You know, that we got through it.
Yeah.
But I think when you have so many partners in the supply chain and you have different timetables, and you know, if we look at the length of leases we sign with our tenants, if you look at the length of the rail contracts, if you look at the length of the leases at the port, I mean, you have a whole spectrum of different timing issues. And then the beneficial cargo owners trying to figure out how to weave through all of that. And it's changing. Will continue to change, and I think we need to be aware of that. And even if we had it figured out exactly right today, we should not become complacent. We should always challenge ourselves and say, hey, you know, should we be doing it that way, or is there a better way? You know, as I mentioned earlier, talk to the guys and the gals on the field, in the streets, on the docks, in the trucks, running the trains. That's what we have to do.
I'm going to give you a heads up because there's another question that I want to make sure we get to later.
Okay.
Because we're about to go into our Q&A segment.
Okay.
But that question is going to be, if we look down the line 10 years from now, and everything happened the way you might hope it's going to happen, what's that going to look like? So stick that in the back of your mind, and I will just remind everybody that my guest is Fran Inman, Senior Vice President of the Majestic Realty Company, and she is a member of the California Transportation Commission, which you've also heard mentioned. It is time for your direct participation in this conversation. Now, for that, I want to welcome back my friend, Dr. Tom O'Brien. Tom is the Center for International Trade and Transportation's Director of Research He's also the Associate Director of Long Beach Programs for Metrans. And we do welcome your questions and comments. What you need to do is type them into the chat window that should be open at the CITT net where you're watching this program right now. And then just hit the button that says SAY, S-A-Y, SAY. And that's in the live stream player on your computer. I can't promise you that we're going to be able to get to every question, but we'll certainly do our best. And I'm also very glad that we'll be able to get Tom's own expertise into this discussion. Tom, welcome back, first of all.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So what do we start with? Do you have some things coming in?
We do. We actually have had a pretty nice exchange, and I know we've got at least the U.S. and Canada represented, so we're reaching a wide audience.
How about Savannah, where Fran just was?
I don't know. I don't know. Some people are identifying themselves, others not, but
okay.
They're all good questions, and I don't know that we'll get to them all, but let's start with the most recent one that came in, and since we're talking about the competitiveness of the region, and you mentioned the panel at Savannah on the Panama Canal, the question is, looks at our competitiveness relative to Prince Rupert and Lázaro Cárdenas. So our North American competitors in Canada and Mexico.
Everybody talks about Prince Rupert as coming on strong.
You know, and I think Prince Rupert is amazing. I had the good fortune of being at the MAR terminals the day they signed that deal. And the amazing thing is, through our work in Bethlehem and really trying to understand the East Coast market a little better than just the Jacksonville. We started in Jacksonville and we're working our way up. But we got to know the MAR folks, and at that time it was privately held. Very similar. We felt at Majestic that we'd been twins separated at birth, because very similar business model. They had never left that area where they really dominated, and you know, were that was they knew their market, and so I came back and I said to our chairman, I said, okay, we need to pay attention, because they don't, you know, go, well, here, there easily. So the fact that they have vetted this and have confidence that this is a viable solution, we need to pay attention. So we became early investigators. We were watching to see, and when others said, oh, that's nothing, it's not going to, you know, what are they talking about, a TEU or a million TEUs maybe. We said, no, this is serious, because you've got real pros who have put together system solutions. And so I think it's very viable. If you see the work the Canadian government did there, with the rail, and there was alignment, and I would argue that there was probably some coalition building that hadn't been done before to facilitate that. So it's very, very real. Mexico, I think, has challenges. We have heard for years that there will be opportunities, increased opportunities, but there's also more challenges, I think, with that. That said, I did get to participate in a Transportation Research Board program where they called a bunch of us together, and they told us to leave our ideas at the door, and we were going to be assigned to teams that we were going to have different trading partners. And so I thought, oh, brother, I don't have time to do this, but okay. You know, I'll do it. And it was just so enlightening to be forced to think about the world changes constantly. And I was on a team that looked at our trading routes had changed, and our partnerships were primarily Canada and Mexico in terms of our trading partners. And so what that meant for me was really a reminder of how dynamic this world is that we live in.
There it is again, a fluid situation. Tom?
There's a follow-up question, Saul, before we move on from the Panama Canal. Wondering that whether we actually have the infrastructure in place to be competitive. The question says, if the Panama Canal expansion causes some freight to go to other ports, is that necessarily bad? if the infrastructure in the ports is operating at capacity?
Well, I don't know that we're really operating at capacity. I think that we've had some choke points along the way, but I'm confident if we put our heads together and our will together that we can figure those out. And, you know, I kind of applaud the Panama Canal, too, for doing that, because I think that it will cause all of us to look for efficiencies and to improve our systems. So competition, in my opinion, isn't bad. I think it makes you think about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and, you know, is that going to really help my customer?
You know, the line I love, which has come out of conversations Tom and I have had, and it did come up during the Point Counterpoint event last October, is, you know, will the canal essentially, if you'll pardon the expression, lift all boats? It's quite possible that, you know, our share of trade, right, our market share may go down even as we see increased traffic in the port.
Right.
Well, but I think there's lots of debate, and one of the things that we talked about was pricing. So regardless of where you are in the life cycle of your organization, I think you always have to be considering price. I mean, maybe there's an exception when you're so high end that, you know, money doesn't matter, but let's say for 99% of us. And who knows how they're going to repay that capital cost, and the fact, what will the operating costs be with a different canal. And, you know, I think you talked about it last week, and I think Bill talked about it in the Journal of Commerce article. Are they going to look to make it a profit center? So who knows? It's kind of like in our sector, when we get will-serve letters from our friends at the railroad, well, the letter's great, but what's it going to cost? And that's really going to determine whether or not that tenant is going to find that rail connection to be the best solution.
Tom, do you have something else lined up for us?
Yeah, I do. And sort of keeping in the theme of infrastructure, there was a comment on the chat that the perception is coming out of Washington that a freight policy will be focused on highways. Would you agree with that? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
I think it needs to be multimodal, and I think we need intermodal. If I go back to my TOD discussion with Urban Land Institute yesterday, I think for our sector, we need to think a lot more about intermodal solutions. I don't think you pick one silver bullet and say everything has to go that way. We know that we need to green our supply chain. Collectively, we've done a lot of work in our region to do that. We will continue to do that. But we could be penny wise and pound foolish if we cause inefficiencies in another part of our supply chain. So I think that, you know, I heard this week that there may not be a freight heading in Micah's version of the bill. Who knows? I mean, it seems like every day when I hear how it's going, it's a little different. So we're hopeful. You know, Senator Boxer clearly is in a leadership role in terms of the importance. But, you know, if we look at the president and his policy of increasing exports, if you look at the trade agreement discussions, if we look at perhaps having John Bryson as the new Commerce Secretary, I think that we have to look at the integration between infrastructure and commerce. If we have had this conversation with the previous secretaries of commerce, you know, we can have the trade agreements, but if we don't have the infrastructure to be able to provide that connectivity, it's not really going to matter. It won't be efficient.
What else do you have for us, Tom?
Question about the sort of the diversity within the region. Do you see continued growth of distribution sector in the Inland Empire? How does the Inland Empire compare to other parts of the region?
Well, our region, the Southern California region, has, I think, more than 1 billion square feet of warehouse distribution facilities today. We've been strategically located near this huge port complex. So we have a huge base here. I think that with the implementation of SB 375, it will be very, very interesting. That legislation actually had a CEQA exemption for the residential, but not for the warehouse, logistics, industrial sector.
I'm wondering, but for those of the viewers who are outside the region, do you want to say a little bit more about what SB 375 and AB 32
That's a good idea.
Sure.
talked about?
AB 32 is the umbrella bill that we passed, 2 years ago, 2008 maybe?
Was it earlier than that?
Yeah, than that, a while back. And so that's the overall global warming bill. That's often used as, held up as a model for others to follow. I would argue that we've got a lot of work left to do, and the devil's in the details, so to speak, so let's not be tooting our horn quite so fast. Let's get some positive work done. But 375 was a companion land use bill that was a recognition by the legislature that a lot of the impacts around our emissions are related to land use decisions. Our land use decisions have historically stayed on the local level, but that gets complicated. So we know our model. It's very formula driven. We understand population. You know, our facilities are typically near pretty good size growing areas of demographics. And I think that, you know, the land prices, if you look on city planning historically, I think you'd find industrial warehouse centers pushed out on the fringes, and that's been driven by, not an afterthought, it's the economics of it. Historically, we could not compete with the price of residential land. Now, the residential market has been challenged, and it seems that it's still challenged, so who knows. But, you know, we've moved further out. Our company, when it started in 1948, we were in the city of commerce and, you know, kind of on the fringes of what was then the core of Los Angeles. We actually had a few buildings in LA city proper. And then we just kind of migrated out along what has turned into basically trade corridors. So another thing I want to mention is really how we use all our partners. Our company has been very active in trying to get widespread adoption of solar on those big flat roofs that are sitting out there. There are several programs, but it's like anything else, it's complicated, and there's lots of players, and we're not there yet. We know from our sector, which is a triple net lease environment, the California Solar Initiative with net metering didn't work. And so we know that basically what we need is a feed-in tariff that is sustainable. Also, from our perspective, those are very precious assets. As a landlord, the worst call you can get is there's a leak in the roof because it's a hole that everything falls through. So, you know, Sue Catley from the California Solar Initiative looked at our roofs and said, oh, I can't wait to get boots on those roofs. And I said, well, that's part of the problem, my friend. We want slippers on our roofs because those are very, very precious. So
this has gone incredibly fast, and I think maybe we have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. Well, I'll try to combine two that talk about the partnerships and the unique nature in Southern California. I'll combine them. One is, what role has labor played in the competitiveness of the region and these partnerships that have formed, maybe in the wake of the Clean Air Action Plan? and also the trucking community. The question specifically says, can you give an example of how you've had independent truckers cooperate on a particular issue, and what concrete steps might you offer to people looking to replicate that?
I mean, I think if you just use our town hall meetings as an example, when we started those, they were pretty much, you know, folks were sitting with arms folded, and, you know, there was this cluster here and the cluster there, and, you know, I think we have come so far. And, you know, when I talk about our coalition building, we're first name basis with the guys from ILWU. And I think that's so important. I remember one meeting that we had them come down to the chamber, and we all kind of laughed and said, how often does this happen, that you get a partnership with ILWU and the chamber? The same with the terminal operators. You know, PMSA, we sit down side by side with them and talk about things on a regular basis. I think trucking, we all learned a lot. And, you know, we were probably as naive as others in understanding how it really worked. We all have a good friend in our region, Patty Senecal, that really kind of taught us a lot about trucking and introduced us to the guys and gals that were really responsible for that area. And I think it's the same thing. One size does not fit all. We heard that from Joey Carnes. And I think we always have to remember that.
And you're back to collaboration.
I'm back to collaboration, so I have to say, well, I'm thrilled to be here. It feels a little isolated because this is a webcast. So I'm going to suggest we try to Skype, so at least we can see everybody's face.
And there's questions we haven't gotten to that we'll try to incorporate into our summary of the 3 series. Interesting questions about on-dock versus near-dock rail in the warehousing sector.
Got to get those near-docks.
Right.
Then.
More on federal freight policy and more on the California Transportation Commission.
Well, let's suggest that this conversation, one way that it can continue is through the CITT website, through the discussions that are fostered there with LinkedIn. And I think that's something that the university would be very happy to facilitate. And we'll find other ways to continue this conversation. The only problem with Skype is you can only have 7 people on at a time. So we'll find other alternatives.
There's a new opportunity. There's a new niche. But we can do conferencing. Yeah.
You're right. We're almost out of time. I'll give you a minute. If you look down the line 10 years and things happen the way you hope they will, what are the Southern California ports and all the rest of our infrastructure going to look like?
Oh, we're going to have free-flowing cargo. We will have, you know, cleaned up our supply chain, greened our supply chain, but we've done it in a way that we haven't driven business elsewhere, so that collectively we have win-win-win-win scenarios. And I think that's going to take a lot of hard work to get there. I think that there will be a general understanding of the fact that we live in a global world, and that means that we need systems and we need a supply chain. So I think maybe everybody will be speaking logistics as a second, third, fourth language.
All right. Well, from your mouth to the ears of all the stakeholders in this industry, and to Sacramento and Washington as well. Thanks so much for bringing so much to this conversation, Fran.
My pleasure.
And for all that you do in our industry and,
thank you.
And in the community. And Tom, thank you as well.
My pleasure.
Fran Inman is Senior Vice President at Majestic Realty. She is also the founding president of the Majestic Realty Foundation and a member of the California Transportation Commission. That is it for this middle installment of our series that we call Cargo and Jobs, Still Ours to Lose. We will be back in 2 weeks for the last of the programs, at least in this series. That'll be Friday, June 17, once again from noon to 1 Pacific time. We're simply calling our topic that day The Challenges Ahead. And our 2 guests are incredibly well qualified to talk about those challenges. They will be John McLaren of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association and a guy named Richard Steinke, who just happens to be the Executive Director of the Port of Long Beach. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsors once again. They're the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Los Angeles, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, and the Metrans Transportation Center. And we've once again been ably supported by the staff of the Center for International Trade and Transportation, including Alex Traver. David Plescat, who's sitting off on the end there pushing the buttons, he's directed today's program. My personal thanks also go to Dr. Tom O'Brien of the CITT and Metrans for his ongoing guidance and assistance. The Executive Director of the CITT is Marianne Veneris, who has been watching us off in the audience here today. Cargo and Jobs, Still Ours to Lose is a production of the Center for International Trade and Transportation. That's a division of the College of Continuing and Professional Education here at California State University, Long Beach. Our executive producer is Associate Vice President and Dean, Dr. Jeet Joshi. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.